God has called us, commissioned us, and commanded us to reach our neighbors with the message and love of Christ. But this is almost impossible if we don't actually know our neighbors. So where do we start to build relationships that will lead to opportunities to accomplish the purpose that we were created for? To go to heaven and take as many people with us as possible. We've been working our way through a simple acronym, START. A simple way to be very intentional to make an eternal difference in the lives of our neighbors. Remember, start with the 5 houses around you. It's intentional, it's natural, and it's simple. You just have to start. S, start with prayer. The first and most important thing that we must do is start with prayer because it's powerful. And if we're genuine and consistent in our praying for our neighbors, we can expect God to act. He will open up opportunities to meet our neighbors, and God will use us to make an impact. T is talk with them about their story. We can never assume that we know the needs of our neighbors or our neighborhood until we've talked with our neighbors. But the key is learning to ask good questions. Close our mouths, open our ears, and listen. Because when we listen to our neighbors, they tell us how to reach, serve, and care for them. A is ask them to a meal. Much of Jesus' ministry was around a table and a meal. If every Christian household regularly invited unchurched neighbors into their home for a meal just once a month, we would reach our Valley for Christ and follow His example in caring for others. Now we come to R. The R stands for reach out with service. And our example, again, is Jesus. He set the example with these incredible words. Jesus said, "For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give His life to rescue many people." It's important to note that the people Jesus served were the people right in front of Him, near Him, or those in close proximity. As humans, we have a tendency to want something big, bold, grand, and sensational. But the reality is that life-altering moments of impact happen mostly through small things done consistently over time. In other words, it's the little things done over and over. We've prayed for them, we've talked with them, and maybe we've had them over for a meal. Now that we know what their needs are and listen to them, it's as simple as helping a neighbor move their trash can, their new couch, or their whole house, helping a neighbor with their yard work, watching your neighbor's house when they're on vacation, pitching in on a weekend project together, bringing food after the birth of a baby, or during times of illness, or when a loved one dies, or helping a new neighbor move into their new neighborhood. The opportunities are there. It's just a matter of whether or not we will intentionally engage. What would happen if every Christ follower in our city began to live this way? It would change our entire valley. Simply being the neighbor that you would want to live by. It all starts with simple acts of service and kindness. We believe that God has placed the people who live around you for a reason, and He wants you to represent Him through consistent acts of service. Because small acts of service done consistently over time will result in huge impact.
Hey friends, my name is Todd Clark and I am brand new to the staff and the teaching team at CCV. And I just want you to know that I am incredibly honored to be a part of this team. And my prayer is that in coming months and coming years that God will use you to grow me. And that God will also use me to grow you closer and closer and closer to Him. I want you to know as well that I didn't move my family here from Southern California over the last few months just so we could hang out together on the weekends, like Saturday and Sunday. I really want to be able to do life with you guys, like 7 days a week. So if you would, sometime today or tomorrow, take a moment and find me on Twitter or on Facebook or on Instagram, because I want to be able to share life with you and celebrate some of the victories that happen in your life, but also kind of be there to encourage you when you're down in the valleys. As I mentioned, our family's only been around here for a couple of months now, but there are already some things that I just love about CCV. Let me share a few of those with you. First of all, I love the amount of people who are inviting friends and family and showing them around CCV campuses on the weekend. It blows my mind. You know what else is amazing to me is these neighborhood groups. There are so many people in these groups, and it just reminds me that, you know, it's a really good thing to come to church, but it's an even better thing to be the church. And so many of you are doing that in your schools, in your workplaces, and especially in your neighborhoods. Another one of my favorite things about CCV is those crazy CCV stickers that you put on your car. I mean, those babies truly create curiosity in this city. In fact, when I was driving here a few months ago, I started seeing those stickers all the way over in Palm Springs in California. It was unbelievable. One other thing I really love about this place is just the weekend teaching. I mean, it is so clear and so passionate and so compelling. This is such an inspiring church to be a part of, and I want you to know I am so thankful to be a part of this place. I'm sure if you've been around CCV for a few weeks or maybe even a few years, you have a lot of stuff that you really love about CCV as well. In fact, why don't we just take a few moments right here? I'm sure you have things that you love about CCV, and let's just share one or two of those things that you love about this place. And when you do that, if somebody in your group also is on Twitter, why don't you tweet out some of those things that you love about CCV and use the hashtag CCVOnline. So take a couple minutes and share some things that you love about CCV. Well, this week I wanted to just take some time and share some of my life and my journey with you. And I also wanted to take some time to look at the life of Paul and the mission that Paul had in his life. You know, there are some places where my life is very, very similar to Paul. And then there are some places where our lives are like completely polar opposites. The very first place where Paul and I are really opposite is how we grew up. You see, Paul did not grow up in a Christian home. In Acts 22, for instance, it says that Paul, who is actually Saul, you probably know this, his name was changed from Saul to Paul when he came to meet Jesus. So anyway, he was sent by his parents at a very young age to study at a very prestigious Jewish school in Jerusalem. His teacher was the most famous Jewish rabbi of that day, named Gamaliel. As a student of Gamaliel, Paul would have memorized the entire Torah by the time he was like 10 or 11 years old. The Torah actually is the first 5 books of the Old Testament of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. He would have memorized all of that by the time he was 10 or 11 years old. To put that in perspective, in the New Testament, that's like memorizing from like Matthew all the way almost through Hebrews. It's 187 chapters of the Bible. Saul, in his schooling, when he was studying the Bible, was trained to interpret the Scriptures and to kind of be searching for a Messiah that would be very, very well connected, very powerful. He was probably going to be like a military or political leader. And because of that, Paul grew up persecuting the church before he ever really preached about Jesus. You see, Paul did not grow up in a Christian home. Myself, on the other hand, well, this is a photo of my family that I took just a few weeks ago at Christmas time when we were all together in Kentucky. Now, I grew up in a very active and entrepreneurial Christian home. Everybody in that picture is a Christian. When I say active Christian home, what I mean is my family was always at church. I mean, whenever the doors were open, we were there. And I say entrepreneurial because one of my first real memories of my family goes back to when my dad started a Christian bookstore in our basement. I was like 5 or 6 or 7 years old at this point, but I can remember that our family would be eating dinner and all of a sudden somebody would knock at the door and my dad would go answer the door and he would lead this person that we didn't even know down into our basement. They would buy books and like Thomas Kincaid Bible covers and bookmarks. I don't know what they were buying. And then they would come back up and leave. You see, I grew up in a very, very Christian home. Let's do this. Let's just take a moment and why don't you share with your group, what type of home did you grow up in? Would you say that it was a super religious home? Or maybe it was just kind of a somewhat religious home? Or maybe you're thinking, man, my family, my home wasn't religious at all. Let's take a few moments to share what type of home you grew up in. So I explained to you where my life and Paul's life are very different in how we grew up. But let me tell you about a place where Paul and I are incredibly similar. That is that we are both church planters. It's now been 11 years ago that I loaded up our family in Kentucky and drove for 10 days together in the car, roughly 3,000 miles from Louisville, Kentucky to Los Angeles, California. Now, how many of you know Louisville and Los Angeles are two very different places? Back in Louisville, we left an incredible job. We had a great church, we had great friends, we had family there, we had incredible schools. And during that move, dozens and dozens of people were asking me, why are you doing this? I mean, why would you leave like a dream job at a great church? And my answer was always the same. I know. It doesn't make any sense, does it? But the bottom line, friends, is I just believed to like the core of my being that God was calling me and my family to like push away from the dock, to get out into some deep waters and to take a risk and to start a church that would capture the curiosity of our culture. My dream, you need to know this, was never just to draw a big crowd. My goal and my dream was to create a community of believers, a church, one person at a time. Now, Paul was a lot like that. Paul was also a church planter. And he planted churches over and over and over and over. And Paul reached hundreds, in fact, thousands of people. And what's amazing is that he oftentimes did this one person or one family at a time. If you would, in your neighborhood group, just take a moment and have somebody read in the story where Paul and the Philippian jailer meet. It's on page 413. I want you to read this because it shows exactly how Paul reached out to people. So just take a few moments and read page 413 and that amazing story. What's so amazing is that whole churches were oftentimes started from these individual encounters and conversations that Paul had. Did you know that Paul wrote the book of Philippians, for instance, to the church in Philippi? And that church was likely started by the Philippian jailer and his family and other individuals that Paul had reached out to in that city. You know, I think in a huge church like CCV, sometimes it's so easy to get into this mindset that only the pastors or only people that stand on stages are really called to reach people for Jesus. But the truth is, every single one of us is called to reach out to people and share Jesus with them. Here's a very important truth that I want you to hear. You are close to someone who is far from God. Let me say that again. You are close to someone who is far from God. In other words, God has placed you where He placed you on purpose. God knows exactly where you live. God knows exactly where you work and where you go to school. He is not surprised. God, I promise you, is not looking down on your life saying, "You still work there? I had no idea." Or "That's where you're going to school? I had no idea." God has you where He has you on purpose. You know, for the last decade of my life, I've lived in Southern California. And one of my very favorite stories about the ocean and about the beach is the story of an older gentleman who was walking along the beach after a huge storm. This storm had blown all kinds of shells and all kinds of starfish up onto the beach. And he was just walking along the beach. Now there was a younger man back about 100 yards watching him. And this younger man observed how every so often this gentleman would bow down and he would grab a starfish and he would throw it out into the ocean. The young man finally made his way up to him and he asked, "What in the world are you doing? Why are you throwing these starfish into the ocean?" And the older gentleman explained that the sun was coming out, and if he didn't get these things back into the ocean, they were going to die. And so the young man walks up to him and says, "Look, there's no way you're ever going to be able to make a difference in the lives of all these starfish. There are hundreds and thousands of these starfish on the beach." In response, the older gentleman bends down, picks up a starfish, throws it into the ocean, and says, "Well, I made a difference to that one." You see, I think if we're not careful, it's so easy for us to take a look at our schools and there's just hundreds or thousands of people, or we look at our workplaces or we look at our neighborhoods and we think, you know what, there's no way I'm going to be able to reach out to and make a difference to all of these people. I love what my friend Andy Stanley says. He says that you should do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. Do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. I want you just to take a few moments in your group, and I want you to think about and share about one person who has influenced you or your family for Jesus. And then I want you to also talk about one person that you or your family is trying to influence for Jesus. You see, so oftentimes it starts by just influencing one. Let's take some time to share about that. I think my very favorite part of this chapter about Paul's life and his mission is right at the top of page 436, where Paul talks about worship. In the Bible, this is found in Romans chapter 12, verse 1, where Paul says, "Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your lives as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship." You know, it's been several years ago now that I was speaking at a youth event in the Midwest. And I got done speaking and I came down off of the stage and there was this huge football player guy that came up to me and he was so excited. And he looked at me and he said, "Todd, I gave my life to Christ tonight." And I looked at him, or I looked up at him actually, and I said, "That's awesome. But what did you give?" And he said, "I gave my life to Christ." And I said, "That's awesome. But just one more time, what did you give?" You see, that's great to say that we've given our lives. And probably many of you sitting in your neighborhood group right now would say that I have given my life. And that's fantastic. But what I want you to know is that is not really what Paul asks us to do. Remember the verse in Romans 12:1 from the top of the page 436 that I just read a few minutes ago? I actually read it wrong. It was printed on your screen wrong. Let me just quote that verse again, and you see if you can recognize the word that is wrong. Romans chapter 12, verse 1. "Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your lives as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship." You see which word is wrong there? You see, Paul doesn't ever really ask us to give our lives. He asks us to give our bodies. You see, I think giving your life is a pretty general term. It's pretty easy to do, actually. But giving your body, that gets very, very specific. Giving your body means that you have to give your eyes to God. It means you have to give your ears to God. You have to give your mouth and your feet and your hands. Paul says that we are to give our bodies as living sacrifices. Now, you've probably heard before that the only real problem with a living sacrifice is that it can crawl off of the altar. Maybe that's you. Maybe at one point in your life, maybe a few years or even a few decades ago, you gave everything to God. But the truth is, over the past few months or years or decades, you've taken your eyes back off of that altar. You've taken your ears or your mouth or your feet back off of that altar. And today you need to decide to put some part of your body back up on the altar, giving your body to God. You know, one of the most common things that people say to me is they come up to me and they say, "Todd, man, I just want to be on fire for God. I so want to be on fire for Him." And you know what I always say to people who want to be on fire for God? I say, then you need to put something up on the altar for God to consume. Because you see, listen to this. God doesn't send fire on empty altars. Let me say that again. God doesn't send fire on empty altars. Do you want to feel on fire for God? Do you want to feel the presence and the power of God coursing through your body? Then you put something up on the altar for God to consume. I don't know what that is exactly for you. Maybe it's your eyes that need to go back up on the altar this week. Maybe you're thinking about renting a movie at Redbox or Blockbuster or something like that, but you know if you rent this movie, it's going to put images into your mind that shouldn't be there. And so you decide not to rent that movie. And right there, you begin to worship God because you're offering your body. Maybe it's your ears Maybe you're driving in the car with some of your friends to school and a song comes on the radio and you know that this song is going to put some awful lyrics in your mind that really shouldn't be there. And so right there in the car with your friends, you reach out and you turn the station, and right there, you just begin to worship. You're offering your body to God. Or maybe it's your mouth. Maybe somebody says something about you and everything inside of you wants to just fire back at them, but you decide just to be quiet and not respond. And right there, you're offering your body to God. Here's what I'd like you to do to wrap up your neighborhood group. I want to ask you to take some time and just share. What is one part of your body that you really need to put it back up on the altar and you need to offer it to God? Let's take some time to think about that.